Welcome to the Explainer. So today, we're diving straight into an incredibly dense, highly concentrated piece of economic data. We're going to unpack a massive forecast regarding international trade, specifically India's pharmaceutical exports over to the UK. It's a fascinating story all about global supply chains, international agreements, and some really serious economic forecasting. It all stems from one single powerful outlook. By the time we wrap up, you'll know exactly how the gears of this global trade machine are expected to turn. Let's just jump right in.
Right off the bat, let's look at our first metric, greater than 8%. You know, in the world of established international trade, anticipating a growth surge of over 8% for an entire sector, that is definitely not a rounding error. It is a massive upward trajectory. We aren't just talking about your organic business-as-usual growth here. A trajectory of over 8% signals a very specific catalyst, like a sudden removal of friction or a tremendous injection of demand. Keep this percentage in the back of your mind, because it's literally the engine of the entire forecast we're breaking down today.
And where exactly is that 8+% growth heading? Well, it's driving toward this absolutely incredible target, 981 billion rupees. Just let the sheer scale of that number sink in for a second. This is the projected destination for the trade corridor we're looking at. When you start nearing the 1 trillion mark in any currency, you're looking at an absolute cornerstone of economic partnership. We're going to look at exactly what goes into that 981 billion rupee target, but first, we got to establish the ticking clock behind it all. And here's our timeline, financial year 2027, or FY27. Honestly, this is the part that makes economic forecasting so fascinating to me. We've got our growth rate of over 8%, we've got our massive target of 981 billion rupees, and now we have our deadline. It sets up this really compelling central mystery. How exactly does this specific market accelerate that quickly to hit such an imposing number by FY27?
Section 1. The FY27 export projection. Let's take a closer look.
Okay, so we've got a really clear chronological runway here. We start from our present-day baseline, move through an interim growth phase, and finally arrive at that FY27 target milestone. It's absolutely crucial to understand economic outlooks like this because they don't represent some overnight jump. I mean, you don't just wake up one Tuesday and suddenly hit 981 billion rupees, right? It requires a sustained, highly targeted trajectory. This forecast entirely relies on that interim phase keeping up that over 8% momentum consistently. Month after month, quarter after quarter, all the way to FY27.
And here are the two main players in our economic equation. The focus is laser-targeted on India's pharmaceutical exports to the UK. So we're looking at a very specific direction of trade here. India is the exporter, sending the pharma products, and the United Kingdom is the destination market. Pinning down the players is key, because it tells us that this entire massive trajectory relies completely on the bilateral relationship between these two specific nations.
Section 2. Decoding the FTA gains, the actual catalyst. So, what actually causes a mature, well-established export sector to suddenly forecast a sustained surge of over 8% toward a near trillion target? What's the spark? Well, it takes something structural. It takes a literal change in the rules of the game. And here is that rule change, the FTA, or Free Trade Agreement. Now, simply put, an FTA is a pact between two or more nations aimed at reducing barriers to imports and exports between them. The source data specifically points to FTA gains as the absolute core driver of this projected surge. In the trade world, barriers can be tariffs, taxes on imports, or they can be these really complex customs quotas and regulatory hurdles. Well, an FTA is specifically designed to smooth all of that out. Normally, standard trade dynamics just hit a brick wall of paperwork, tariffs, and regulatory delays. But when you factor in FTA gains, that friction is drastically reduced. It acts like a rocket booster for exports. For India's pharma sector shipping over to the UK, these anticipated FTA gains mean their products can enter the market faster, cheaper, and just way more efficiently. That specific reduction in friction is the secret ingredient making this entire growth trajectory possible.
Section 3. The over 8% surge. Let's analyze the momentum.
When we compare standard baseline growth right up against our anticipated surge, the difference is striking. See that accelerated jump past the 8% mark? That is entirely attributed to the expected gains from the Free Trade Agreement. The baseline is kind of what you'd expect without any major policy changes, right? But that secondary, accelerated metric really reveals how the agreement is literally lifting the growth ceiling for the entire sector.
Notice how perfectly these variables interlock. We have our sector, pharmaceuticals. We have our catalyst, the FTA gains, and we have our resulting trajectory, over 8% growth. If you take away the catalyst, the whole trajectory completely falls apart. The expected success of pharmaceutical exports in this corridor is directly, inextricably tied to the actual implementation and success of those trade agreement gains.
Section 4. Reaching the $98 billion target, the finish line.
So when we stack all of these metrics together, it builds up so logically. You see the sector and the destination setting the stage. Then you apply that massive growth rate of over 8%. And when you compound that growth over our timeline, the final value spits out that substantial target, 981 billion rupees. Every single data point relies heavily on the others. It's honestly a fantastic example of how big economic forecasts are built piece by piece.
To truly wrap our heads around this, it really helps to view this economic forecast as a distinct three-step procedure. Step 1, secure the FTA gains. That barrier reduction absolutely has to happen first. Step 2, the market responds to those specific gains by surpassing the 8% growth mark. And Step 3, by maintaining that accelerated momentum, the corridor finally hits the $98.1 billion mark by the time we reach FY27. It's a complete chain reaction where the outcome of Step 3 is entirely dependent on nailing Step 1.
Section 5. Looking ahead to FY27. Getting the complete picture. Listen to this exact quote straight from the source data. India's UK pharma exports to grow over 8% to 981 billion in FY27 on FTA gains. Look at how incredibly dense that single sentence is. I mean, when we started this explainer, that probably just sounded like a string of jargon and numbers. But now, you can clearly see the entire story packed within it. You see the players, the timeline, the target, the growth rate, and that all-important economic catalyst making the whole machine work. Honestly, unpacking a sentence like this is exactly why we explore these topics in the first place.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today. We've mapped out exactly how these numbers work for India and the UK. But what might this massive FY27 forecast mean for the future of global pharmaceutical supply chains? When two major players shift their trade dynamics this drastically, it sends ripples across the entire globe. How are other nations going to respond? Could this become the new blueprint for global healthcare trade? Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the data.